Hiya! It's your host, Mariah, for this episode of Black History Quest. Thank you for joining us so much for our Oregon Black Pioneers History Research and Conversation program, sponsored by the Collins Foundation. Now, we are coming to you live on Oregon Black Pioneers Facebook and YouTube pages, and we so appreciate you for spending an hour of your day with us. If you can't stick around for the whole show, don't worry. You'll be able to find this and every episode of Black History Quest on our YouTube page. But before we get started with the show, let me tell you a little bit about our organization. What is Oregon Black Pioneers? Well, we are Oregon's only statewide historical society dedicated to preserving and presenting the experiences of people of African descent here in Oregon. Since 1993, we've helped illuminate this seldom told history through a variety of ways, including books, walking tours, exhibits, free lesson plans, which you can download on our website, and programs like this one. Now, this is actually our 20th episode of Black History Quest. Whoop, whoop. If you're not familiar, if you somehow found yourself seeing the episode tonight, let me tell you a little bit about our program. Black History Quest is an original program brought to you by Oregon Black Pioneers. Now, BHQ is designed to help discover and share Black history here in Oregon, thanks to the support of the Collins Foundation. Through this program, we've been able to hire local researchers to act as history investigators to dive deep into the unknown and share their findings here on our virtual show. While the goal is to continually deepen our understanding of Oregon's Black history, our show also offers a look behind the scenes at what historical research is actually like. So thanks for joining us live every other month to learn about this new research and hear what it's like to uncover new stories related to local Black history. Now, as I mentioned before, every episode is archived on our YouTube channel so that our fellow Oregon Black Pioneers can watch in the future on their own time. But for those Pioneers joining us live, please share your questions in the chat section after the live of the live stream after the presentation so that we can discuss them on air. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the meat of the episode. Today, we are so lucky to have Cayla McGrail as our history investigator. Now, Cayla is an architectural historian specializing in Portland queer places and spaces with an extensive background in history, museums, and historic preservation. Their professional and personal passions also include pop culture, fat studies, and digital humanities. When they're not digging deep into the archives, you can find Cayla on the dance floor or watching ducks. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Cayla McGrail.
Oh my gosh. Hello.
Hi, Cayla. Thanks for joining us on the show. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic to hear that because we're really excited to have you as this episode's history investigator. Now, Cayla, before we let you dive into the presentation, let's go over a little bit of a teaser for folks. As you know, all Black History Quest investigations begin with a source that spark an interest. So please tell us a little bit more about the source that you were looking into and why it caught your attention.
Yeah, I'm looking at a dance night at Echo Theater from 1994, and we'll touch on this in a moment a little bit deeper, but as you mentioned, being an architectural historian, looking at places, trying to find where Black queer history happened, and knowing that the Echo Theater has been a long-standing space for queer arts and queer community, it was really fascinating to find this event for the No on 13 political campaign, No on 13, and just wanted to find out more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm curious, what sort of questions did you have about this source when you first ran into it? And what did you think it might represent?
Yeah, definitely questioning who the people involved were. As it says in the ad, DJ Rupert Kennard was present, and he's such a figure in Portland art scene and community and has just been around for so long. So really fascinating to see that he was also a DJ among his many other things he's active in. Wondering, I did part of this early research during a race and place preservation class looking specifically at Black Portland history, so trying to elevate more of what were the Portland lesbian and gay groups of color that were involved. Definitely wanting to expand, especially since Portland and Oregon is so white, to really investigate how this event brought together these communities, especially in a time where political organizing against a really offensive ballot measure was key. So just, wanting to know a little bit more of the people and how it impacted political organizing of the day.
Oh, I love that so much. You're absolutely right that there's a narrative that there isn't Black history, and we really appreciate this opportunity to, showcase the intersectionality between these communities that have been working alongside each other and, have intersectionality, as I mentioned, but don't often get highlighted in that same way. So we're really excited for this opportunity to learn a little bit more, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to share it with us.
Awesome. So thank you again so much for having me here. The big question that I'm looking at is, what impact did the Soul, Rhythm, and Blues Funk Fest dance against Ballot Measure 13 have on campaign organizing? I wanted to also note that some of the stuff I will be talking about in this history quest includes violence, death, homophobia, and racism. So if at any time you need to leave the presentation, that's totally okay, but I hope you do come back to watch it later. So the initial source is this advertisement in a 1994 issue of Just Out, advertising the event, saying Portland's lesbian and gay men of color community groups come together to sponsor a soul, rhythm, and blues Funk Fest dance against Ballot Measure 13. DJ Rupert Kennard will spin a virtual history of dance music, 9 p.m., Saturday, October 15th at Echo Theater. And as I mentioned, this was part of a research project I was doing in graduate school, working on Queering the Albina Project to find place-based histories of Portland's Black queer history. Specifically, I was looking at the documents Cornerstones of Community, which was completed in 1997, and the multiple property documentation entitled African American Resources in Portland, Oregon from 1851 to 1973. This project I was doing looked both at places in these documents that might not have been documented specifically for queer history, and also looking at other places not mentioned at all in these documents to expand where queer history and Black history is documented. So before getting into the campaign in the 1990s, I want to briefly set us in the context of 1988. Lon Mabon, chair of the United States Citizens Alliance, founded the conservative activist group and political action committee, the Oregon Citizens Alliance, in 1988, or OCA. While the OCA targeted a range of political issues, the group epitomized the growing national backlash against gay civil rights movements, especially as they employed the rallying platform, No Special Rights. Their first political success was Ballot Measure 8, entitled Revokes Ban on Sexual Orientation Discrimination in State Executive Branch. This measure repealed the then Governor Neil Goldschmidt's Executive Order 8720, which meant to protect executive government employees from discrimination based on their sexual orientation. And 53% of Oregons approved this measure. And this image is from the OCA's newspaper. I just kind of love that the militant homosexual agenda is used, even though in this context it is to the detriment of queer Oregonians. At the same time, the passage of Ballot Measure 8 reflected and furthered further enabled a hostile environment across Oregon. Of course, there is an extensive history of Oregon's hostility to diverse communities, but Ballot Measure 8 further intensified that. Days after the OCA successfully overturned the ordinance on November 12th, Ethiopian immigrant Mulagat Sharat was murdered in front of his southeast Portland apartment by 3 neo-Nazi skinheads. And the project, It Did Happen Here, an anti-fascist people's history, has extensive podcasts talking about this incident and what it meant in Portland at the time. For that podcast, the scholars interviewed several activists and journalists, including Patrick Mazza, who reflected, saying that, quote, Portland got a reputation around the country as a place where Nazi skinheads could come. For a city of our size, we had the most skinheads per capita. It was the skinhead capital. They were beating up on Black people, beating up on gays. They hated the gays. This was going on for a number of years. And activist M. Treller further shared that, quote, while the boneheads were there, which is the term they used for skinheads, the Oregon Citizens Alliance was also there as well. So while they were saying, let's attack queer people, let's get rid of abortions, that was the political background in which the neo-Nazis were also organizing. So a lot of other scholars point to this moment in the story of Ballot Measure 9 and Ballot Measure 13 and Oregon in the late 20th century as being really a key turning point in organizing and activism. And I think today, too, Oregon has a specific image being a certain type of place, but there are several instances like this that kind of burst that picture open. So the OCA continued to propose anti-LGBTQIA legislation through the 90s, especially as they saw success in 1988. The big one that a lot of scholarship and organizing went into and has covered is Ballot Measure 9. This ballot measure was focused on amending the Constitution that the government cannot facilitate, must discourage homosexuality, other behaviors. And then I've added some of the summary text here that all governments in Oregon may not use their monies or properties to promote, encourage, or facilitate homosexuality, pedophilia, sadism, or masochism. All levels of government, including public education systems, must assist in setting a standard for Oregon's youth, which recognizes that these behaviors are abnormal, wrong, unnatural, and perverse, and that they are to be discouraged and avoided. So as I mentioned, a lot of activism went into trying to defeat this ballot measure. There were organizations like People of Faith Against Bigotry, Bigot Busters, Rural Organizing Project, African Americans Voting No 9, really trying to build coalition to defeat this measure. And Pat Young, a scholar who wrote a thesis on Ballot Measure 9, summarized that, quote, some members of the gay community were the harshest critics of the No on 9 campaign, as they wanted the campaign to educate voters about gay issues, build lasting relationships, and reach well beyond the Tri-County area. Others felt excluded. While being left out was a difficult experience, it was also an empowering experience as a group sprang up around the state to fill the voids in the No on 9 campaign. So some of those groups, especially the African Americans voting No on 9 and even Asian Americans voting No on 9 or against 9, really showed that these political campaigns that were not being as intentional and intersectional as they could be, and so these groups were splintering off from the main campaign. And this is important because it kind of happens again in Ballot Measure 13. And Kathleen Sadat, who is a key organizer and community member who was a part of the No on 9 campaign, really rallying the African Americans voting no on 9, mentioned that, quote, the problems of racism within the campaign were the same as outside the campaign. Really just wanting to highlight that there is this kind of context of racism in and out of Portland community, political organizing, and how that kind of ties into the significance of what this event of the dance against Ballot Measure 13 is trying to accomplish. I also want to add that No on 9 Remembered is a really great project from the Western States Center, where they show 30 stories for 30 days of different aspects of No on 9, because it has been such a volatile campaign, and remembering it is really significant for understanding our political organizing today. So even though 56% of Oregonians rejected this ballot measure, the OCA did not stop. It accomplished passing similar ballots in like Corvallis and Springfield, and then immediately after losing, Lon Mabon also said that they would come back with a similarly phrased ballot measure. So in 1994, they launched Ballot Measure 13 to amend the Constitution. Government can approve classifications based on homosexuality. So they were trying to ensure there were classifications based on homosexuality. People could not advise or teach children, students, or employees that homosexuality equates legality or socially with race and other protected classifications, could not spend public funds in a manner promoting or expressing approval of homosexuality, and really trying to frame it as a Protect the Children Act. As you can see in this advertisement that says, finally, a mainstream answer to the gay rights question, Ballot Measure 13 protects our children from the promotion of homosexuality in the schools and protects the basic civil rights of all Oregonians. Ballot Measure 13, it's a solution we can all live with. In the opposition to the campaign, they're really trying to show that it's doing the exact same thing as Measure 9, and even the ACLU and other activists call it a son of 9, since it's copied so much of the previous ballot measure. So I'm going to turn a little bit over to the resources now that I looked at to research both the context and research the specific event. A lot of my work relies on secondary resources and primary resources, especially in this context of the Ballot Measure 9 documentary that was made, that's available on Canopy. It Did Happen Here podcast, book, and then Ballot Measure, or Measure 9, Oregon's 1992 Anti-Gay Initiative by Pat Young, that she wrote in 1997. There's also extensive oral histories at Oregon Historical Society that I referenced when looking into this, because as I mentioned, there's so much scholarship and context existing for trying to complete this work. Also, I just ran into Rupert Kennard at Pride a few weekends ago and was able to pick up his book where he does talk about political activism at this time. And I got to talk to him about what he remembers of the event a little bit. Another key research and source material was newspapers, specifically, especially since the initial source came from Just Out. A lot of the research was trying different phrases with Measure 13 or dance against Measure 13, trying to find other instances where they might be talking about the event, because that has been one of the challenges, is that my initial source is the only advertisement I have found of the event to begin with. So looking at Just Out, especially since it was a premier queer newspaper at the time and just had so much coverage of 9 and 13. Another major source was going to PSU and looking at Kathleen Sadat's papers, where she has printed out emails and archival materials related to No on 9 and 13. So I was able to find a few of the No on 13 people of color organizing that she was particularly active in, but again, nothing that mentioned the dance. So that led me to looking at Holly Pruitt's papers at Oregon Historical Society. Holly Pruitt was a campaign director for the No on 13 campaign, so really going in on all of her archives to look at what they were doing internally in the campaign and materials promoting different events like the 30-day countdown rally at Pioneer Courthouse Square. And I'll say both PSU and Oregon Historical Society are open for other researchers to go in. OHS has about 30 different collections that Oregon Queer History Collective has collected and gathered and partnered with community members like Holly Pruitt to make available. And you can find that on their website of the different collections they have. And so looking at 13, another major source was those campaign materials and finding pictures of the headquarters and other materials they were using. And as I mentioned, there was not a lot of material related to this event until I started really digging into Holly's papers for the POC plan, I think is the title on the archive box. And they did have some collaboration early on, and the No on 13 was trying to build a lot of coalition with communities of color and working with communities, and the breakfasts from Kathleen's papers were one of the ways that they were trying to engage with community in different ways. And then the funk dance, and you can kind of see in this document there's different organizations like PFLAG, Rainbow was a queer youth organization, Brother to Brother was a prominent gay and bisexual African American group in the 90s. And you got PFLAG, the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, Lesbian Community Project. So really trying to use existing organizations. But in this document from one of the breakfast meetings, there's a brief mention of the Soul, Rhythm, and Blues Funk Fest at Echo, which is really exciting to find because I reached out to Holly Pruitt a couple weeks ago and asked her if she had any recollection of it, and she said no. So to find it in the notes of her papers was really exciting. But again, just a brief mention. At the end of the campaign, they connected with a lot of the staff members and volunteers and community partners to review what worked and what didn't work in the campaign. And there's, again, one tiny mention of Funk Fest from one of the organizers saying misdirected with incorrect info initially created confusion. So again, really struggling in a coalition building process to have information to be aligned, and I think that is stemming from work that was going on in the No on 9 campaign as well. And then this page is Kathleen's personal reflections on everything that happened in the campaign, and one really significant line that she talks about is needing to have more diversity and people of color in the organizing, and not just having her as a key figure, but other community members and bringing them to the forefront. And a lot of the other members talk about that as well in these notes from dissecting the campaign, just not people involved early on or really involved in leadership positions. So the significance of this event, again, as I've mentioned, it's really important to think about, and as Mariah mentioned, really significant to think about the intersectionality of political organizing, of Portland's queer community, of Portland's Black community, really recognizing that Black Oregonians have been at the forefront of queer organizing and often have to find spaces of their own to do organizing. And really thinking today about the small scale organizing in big political campaigns. No on 9 and No on 13 and later campaigns have really big events like the Countdown rally and really big sponsored demonstrations, but there's also a lot of small scale organizing that happens, just dancing to music to fundraise or having breakfast together to educate community members and voters. Especially thinking about the small scale in ways that the archive doesn't capture, that campaign directors don't remember, and how that is still really significant pieces of our history. And two, thinking about what community members who were involved in those activities and after, looking at the oral histories that OHS has, Jones, who's involved in Brother to Brother and other activisms in activist activities in the time, said, quote, "I think Basic Rights Oregon," which is the organization that grew up the No 13 campaign, is still active today, has done an outstanding job in showing up for a broad range of issues, and that was the strategy that was discussed and developed through hundreds of political relationships and interactions through the 80s and 90s. So it's really interesting to see how it manifested as an ongoing reality of Basic Rights Oregon, and strategically has been successful in terms of how they have standing to really engage communities of color. So the next steps in my research for this, since this has been an event that not a lot of archival information exists about, because it's just kind of one of those small one-off things that was really significant to the community, especially in thinking about Black queer communities coming together for themselves, in the sense of the breakfasts, also the No on 9, African Americans voting No on 9, really organizing together. just really wanting to focus more in on trying to find examples of those to elevate the small scale organizing, and really reflect that this one event is part of a larger framework of political organizing in the 90s and how we can look to examples like this today. Also, next steps, I think, is really looking at the larger campaigning of No on 13 and how that has morphed into Basic Rights Oregon. You can kind of faintly see the post-election plans on this slide, talking about just the future of No on 13 and then looking at basic rights coming out of that. So I want to thank Oregon Black Pioneers for hosting me and allowing me to do research into a really fun topic, thinking about dance and politics and community organizing at the micro and macro levels. Oregon Queer History Collective, Oregon Historical Society that has so much materials available, Portland State University Special Collections and University Archives, University of Oregon, Historic Newspapers, It Did Happen Here podcast, No on 9 Remembered, and Oregon Public Broadcasting that has also done a lot to remember No on 9.
All right. Thank you, Cayla. This was, really interesting to see like, for example, for the skinheads part, we talk about those stories a lot, like Mulligata Surah, of course, we talk about stories like that, but it was very enlightening to, compare what was going on for these communities side by side, and the fact that just like the KKK before them, they weren't just targeting, people of color, but also targeting other minorities, like for the KKK with the Catholics and Jewish folks, and of course, Black folks here in Oregon. And then later on with these neo-Nazi skinheads, to see them also targeting these underrepresented groups. Mm-hmm. I feel like is just an important piece of talking about stories like these and recognizing that, oftentimes we're all impacted, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like it. But yeah, just first off, thank you for, sharing these things. I know I have some questions that came up, and honestly, the first one I'm going to ask is because I was kind of fangirling a little bit. I do have BB and the Diva from River Kennard, and so I'm hoping to get it signed someday, and it seems like he might be a good connection for that. But I'm curious, did he have any recollections of this dance? He was the DJ, spinning tunes. So when you got a chance to speak with him in person, did he have any memories of it? Also, do you know if he DJ'd more? Like perhaps that's part of why, Yeah. But yeah, I'm curious what his thoughts were. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because he did remember and said that it was so significant that so many communities of color were coming together to have this event. It was a very brief interaction at Pride, but just that he was able to really emphasize like how significant it was that brother to brother, and I think sister to sister was equivalent group, and Asian Pacific Islander lesbian and gays like all came together to organize it, was really significant. I'm sure he has a lot more to say, but being at Pride, just trying to catch him and go, hey, I'm doing this project and you happen to DJ this event. Tell me real quick.
Well, I mean, I just love also that you got to interact with him in the community at a Pride event. That, seems pretty fitting, like given the fact that he was part of this like very important, but albeit maybe small, moment in these efforts. Another question that I had was that you did mention a lot of, like, there was documentaries about Measure 9. Were there, is there as much scholarship about Measure 13, or is it not
Yeah,
quite as covered.
not as quite as covered, which I think is another piece of like what I think is significant about it, is because No on 9 gets so much highlight and recognition as being such an impactful campaign and moment in Oregon history, but that was like not the end of it. Like, we defeated it, but then like 2 years later it just happened again. And I think a lot of the organizers say there was kind of this like gay apathy around it, and people were tired and not really engaged as much. So I'm kind of curious if that adds to the lack of scholarship, because No on 9 just took so much from everyone that by the time 13 came around, it was just so much. And yeah, it's really interesting that they're, even in doing this project, I couldn't find much like how Pat Young has a whole master's thesis dedicated to No on 9. I haven't seen a similar scope and expansiveness of it. So that kind of drew me to this topic too, to try and find more.
Oh, yeah. That's so interesting. Well, hey, this episode will add to what little scholarship there may be.
Yes.
This will probably be because of that, this will probably be a very useful, tool for folks to get kind of a quick overview of that history, through what you shared in this episode. Another question that I had was, you mentioned that Basic Rights Oregon kind of grew out of the No on Measure 13. Did you see any, like, is that described? I just haven't, I haven't like looked at their website, but is that part of their like current ethos about how they describe the work that they do, that it grew out of efforts like these?
I think so. At least some of the past work that I was looking at of people describing in oral histories of the history of Basic Rights Oregon, that they specifically point to the supporting our communities, becoming the No on 13, becoming Basic Rights Oregon. And the No on 13 and supporting our communities political action committee were efforts to try and build sustaining efforts at political organizing. I think coming out of No on 9, it was kind of like, oh, we're building a No on 9 campaign, and then after 9, it goes away. But OCA still had all of these smaller Sons of Nines across the state. So with No on 13 and supporting our communities, it was really about how do we build efforts that don't just go away after the campaign is won. So I think that way Basic Rights Oregon kind of frames it in like having a sustained organizing arm to defend everyone's basic rights.
That makes sense. that is logical. Well, thank you. We did get a question from the audience that I would love to read and I guess maybe answer. It says, this is potentially a question for both of you. What do you think the role of public history nonprofits like Oregon Black Pioneers and Oregon Queer Historical Collective? I'm sorry. OQHC, my brain's, but yeah, could be in a political organizing today. So what is the role of organizations like ours in political organizing today? And if you want to, clarify the name of OQHC for me real quick and then answer that question, that'd be great.
Oregon Queer History Collective. Some people may know it as Gay and Lesbian Archives of the Pacific Northwest. I think about this question a lot, especially as a nonprofit that has a lot of past programming and archives built around political activism. In 2022, there was like a 30 years like lessons learned looking at No on 9 and trying to take lessons learned from that campaign and that political organizing. So I think public history has such a big role in how we can organize politically today by examining these small scale, like a dance night or big political rallies at Pioneer Courthouse Square. And I think I've been talking recently too that history is among the first subjects that are targeted in public school funding and funding in general, and the
Right.
alt-right conservative political agenda, because there is so much power in knowing our political history.
Yes, absolutely. To build on that, yes, I think, the main easy answer is that we can learn from those who came before us, and it's very easy for those stories to get lost to time. So it is kind of on organizations like ours to help preserve those lessons so that we can utilize them in the future. So, but I think you really, definitely spoke to that. And one thing that I think, this presentation shows me in terms of like learning lessons from the history that we might not necessarily engage with a lot, is that there are fun ways to organize. Like you don't have to, it doesn't have to be as serious or as like intense as a lot of organizing efforts can be. And you can kind of bring joy into that. And realistically, like having joy is kind of a radical act. And so creating those like joyous opportunities to, move forward political organizing is a really beautiful way to do it. And even if we didn't learn a lot about exactly like what that was like, it'd be cool to have like a set list. I'm sure is a DJ, so, I'm sure he didn't have a set list. He probably went with the vibes, but like it'd be cool to have something like that. But even still, just knowing that, instances like this happened and being able to look to them as, inspiration for the future, I think is part of what our organizations can help add to those efforts today. You really just can't, you can't, move forward without knowing where you've been. So I think that's a big piece of how we can plug into the political organizing that's being done. And another part, for Oregon Black Pioneers is also uplifting the organizations that have been doing it this whole time, right? So, we get to tell the stories of the NAACP and the Urban League and organizations like this, the Black Panthers and other community organizing opportunities. And I think that's, part of our role to finish answering that question. That fantastic question. Thank you so much for sharing that question in the chat. Are there, if anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to add them. But I do have a few more that I would love to ask you. So, well, actually, before we get into the last few questions, I do want to just point out for anybody that is, viewing this episode, that part of the reason that we wanted to work with you is because of the work that you did through that project you mentioned briefly in your presentation, to help showcase this intersectional history and to do it in a place-based way, utilizing ArcGIS, which is a really cool platform that we use for our online exhibits. And so for me, like when I first joined the organization, one of the first resources that was shared with me was your exhibit. And you can find that online by searching for Queering the Albina Project, because that is literally what you were doing, is kind of queering, adding this queer history to the project that at that time, as you mentioned, was really showcasing these like cornerstones and these physical locations connected to Black history, but often leaving out the queer history that was also connected to them. So this was just one of many locations that you were able to identify, and the Echo Theater in particular was one of many locations that you were able to identify on that online exhibit. And so if anybody wants to find out more information or find other sources that could lead to investigations like this, you can check out that awesome resource that Cayla put together. But now, so that's why you had the image of the Echo Theater advertisement, and it's part of how you connected Echo Theater to Black history. But I'm curious, having started with that, what did you think your findings, in what ways did your findings meet your expectations, and in what ways were they different? I'm curious.
Yeah, I guess, unfortunately, I did have a feeling that there would not be a lot, just from previous trying to search for it across Just Out and not finding anything. I think too, in the larger scope of my work, there's several events that happen at these places that are historically significant, but there's just the like intangible heritage aspect of it,
Yes.
kind of being the reason why it's significant and not having a lot of tangible remnants of it. So I definitely had a feeling there wasn't going to be a lot to be found, but it was really surprising to actually see reference to it at OHS in these papers and in these meetings. So it was really exciting, even though it was just like 1 or 2 lines in the campaign meetings, to know that it was there, and that was just really great. And I think to like connecting with Rupert, I had sent him an email like weeks ago asking him and didn't hear back from him. So to actually like see him at Pride and be like, hey, can you answer this quick question about this event, and tell me why it was like so important. I think too, as I mentioned to you before, it's like going to the archives to look at different collections, the Holly Pruitt and different like political campaigning papers are not like my favorite areas, but like not my focus. Definitely feel a line in like the joy and fun parts of history, and looking at like dance and art and sports and different organizing in that sense. So having to turn to more political campaign archives, which is really fun because of all of the drama that are in those archives, which is one of the reasons why I love history in the first place, is just like the gossip and the drama. So getting to read like evaluations of like the campaign and like what worked and what didn't work was really exciting. And yeah, just seeing names that I knew in the archives still, and seeing how much of a presence like Kathleen Sadat had across different archives and different collections, and it's kind of like, oh, she's everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, oh, that's Kathleen. Hey.
That's pretty fun. I bet, yeah, being able to just, I think the most recent episode that we had, we talked about with Milo Reed, the like usual suspects when you end up doing research like this. And you've stated a lot of names from that era that are kind of the usual suspects that used to pop up. And it's interesting how they can, be connected to stories like these, even just lightly. I will say I find it very like funny that. Can you remind me the name of the person? Pruitt? Was it Pruitt last name?
Oh, Holly Pruitt, yeah.
Okay, it is Holly Pruitt. That's what I thought. But that Holly had information about it in the notes and still didn't remember, I think is hilarious. But that's just part of the game, right?
No, and it makes me really think about that kind of like macro and micro organizing, because it's like, oh, she's looking at one of their orgs charts. It's like so many different regional officers and campaigners and volunteers, and like the structure within the political campaign, that it's like, okay, I guess she's not going to remember something being like said offhand in a meeting, but to the people like organizing it. And I think that's one of the things too with the expected results, is that archives are political in the sense of like who they document and who they keep and who they don't keep and what's kept and archived and remembered and told. So I think going into it being overall a lot of the archives here, lacking so much. So that's like why I look up to Black History Quest and Oregon Black Pioneers for the work that you're doing, because it is amazing.
Oh, thank you. You weren't supposed to compliment us, but I'll take it. Appreciate that. Now, you mentioned it in your presentation, but if you have any more that you want to say, I'm curious, like where would your research from here go? What do you think would be next?
Yeah, I think I really liked your point of like the joy and like dancing, and I really did want to look into like dance and politics. And so looking more into that, because I think there's even examples today of like how different queer dance nights are being used as political activism. And there's a whole history of dance as politics.
Oh, true.
So
True.
just really leaning into that more. And I think this kind of comes up in the campaigning critiques of like being non-Portland focused, to really examine like how were there similar efforts in rural organizing or Southern Oregon or the coast to really bring in BIPOC communities, because I think Oregon Queer History Collective, queer history, queer community often gets like centered on Portland, but there's so much more organizing across the state that needs to be looked at.
Truth. Oh, I love that. As the only statewide organization that's dedicated to Black history, we definitely very much vibe with that. You know, there are lots of these stories that are kind of can get left out of the narrative because they're so disparate. They're not in the hub of these stories, and so they can be left out. But hopefully, we can follow up with you someday and find out some stories of this sort of organizing, like on the coast. I know there are like queer clubs on the coast today, and I wonder maybe that's something for a future, research, the predecessors to that. But yeah. Okay, that's cool. Well, hopefully we'll find out more about that eventually. I do want to say that you. And I keep wanting to say things, so sorry about that. But this you mentioned how it was. This macro, micro stuff. And it makes me curious about the people that were in attendance, like not the organizers, but just the actual folks that, were at this dance. And so this is actually just going to be a call to our audience watching now or in the future. But if you were there, like if this is, very much recent living memory, if you were there, please reach out to us and share your experiences, your memory of what that was like. Oh, sorry. I want to open the floor for folks to do that, but I also see that we have another question that I'd love to share with you before we get to our final wrap-up question. So, but yeah, if anybody knows anything or was at that dance, please reach out to Oregon Black Pioneers or Cayla at the OQHC. But for the final question from the audience, I'm curious if either of you have any thoughts you'd like to share about independent versus official archives. So that's an interesting question. You had maybe a thought about it. Do you want to share?
I struggle so much in my work with this because I was formerly at the city of Portland working on queer history to add to the National Register of Historic Places, and in the past year they've taken off a lot of information and trying to erase history. So constantly feeling the tension between it's really significant to document and preserve these places, but the National Register and the National Park Service are was not made for us and is not made for us and is actively erasing our history. So this question is constantly in my mind of official versus independent and grassroots, and even working with Oregon Queer History Collective and this grassroots, all volunteer, member funded organization, just feeling the significance of independent archives in the sense that we want everyday people's histories, and there's so much history to preserve and protect, even if it's not a big figure, great man piece. Just your existence as an Oregonian is significant to the archives that maybe official archives don't want or have, or there's a whole history of that, as I mentioned. But also really feeling the strain of, because we're some of these independent archives like Oregon Black Pioneers or Oregon Queer History Collective or any kind of non-official governmental entity, just lacking the resources, like financially, to be able to like do all of the work that we want to do. And or Historical Society has a bond pass to like support the next 5 years of their organization, where it's like there's not a bond passing for you or me. So
True.
So just kind of like the tensions between what we have access to and how that further impacts what's being saved. No shade against Oregon Historical Society. I truly do really love them, and they are so great and have so many resources available. But just thinking of,
comparison-wise,
the history of queer archives, history of Black archives, and how that fits in this narrative, the whole thing.
Totally.
You know that
too. Yes, that's a big, hard question, and I'm sorry that I posed it to you. I kind of read it live, so but I will say I definitely agree with a lot of those thoughts, and I'll say that I think they're both important. I think that we need to have both so that both can keep each other. Like we can make sure that everything is being preserved, and so. We work with the Oregon Historical Society a lot to do this work. We use their resources a lot, and also have put up exhibits and plan to do so about like this time period that we're talking about, the 80s and 90s, coming up soon. So it is absolutely vital to us to be able to work with organizations like this with official archives. But I do think it's also important that both like smaller entities like our organizations and individuals take a part in this archival process, because if we all collectively hold on to this history, they can't take it away from us. So that's my little thought on it. But that, will, bring us to pretty much the close of our episode. So I want to ask the final question that we ask all of our presenters, our history investigators. So how has what you uncovered changed our understanding of history?
I've been thinking about this a lot today, and I really think it changes, at least for me, like how we can think about political campaigns and what it means to organize by us and for us. How like even the smallest like dance night at a theater can really, like, as you did so greatly, like call out to the people who attended, because I'm sure for them like it had such a bigger impact on them being a part of political organizing, to be in a space that BIPOC queer communities was creating to bring them in. So I think some of the big question is like, it didn't have an impact on like the official campaign organizing, but I think in the smaller scale, individual community member to community member, shaping like their maybe perception of the campaign or their knowledge of the campaign.
Exactly.
So I think thinking so much about that on a personal, individual level, and how a lot of that is missing from the archive, and needing to do more to find those instances.
Absolutely. I think also I'll say just the visibility of it is pretty important for folks that might be a part of both communities like me. It's really important to see that there have been people doing this work visibly for literally decades now. So just thank you for, at the very least, informing our audience about these types of stories, because it's really important to include that intersectionality, and we hope to continue doing so as we move forward.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, it has been so wonderful to learn from you this evening and to hear a little bit about your perspective. Really appreciate the questions and the thoughtful responses that we were able to go through. So yeah, thank you so much for being a history investigator this month and for sharing your incredible research with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Black History Quest. Now, as always, we want to thank the Collins Foundation for sponsoring our show. You can learn more about them and the projects that they support at thecollinsfoundation.org. And Oregon Black Pioneers depends on the support of ordinary people who believe in sharing the stories of Oregon's Black history. If you enjoyed this show and would like to support it and others like it, please consider a donation to Oregon Black Pioneers using the link that you might be able to find below or going to our website, OregonBlackPioneers.org, and going to our donate page. Now, if you have any questions about this episode or any insights that you'd like to share as an attendee for the dance, or if you'd like to become a history investigator yourself, please send an email to hello@OregonBlackPioneers.org. Now, stay tuned for the next episode of Black History Quest in September, where, as always, we'll try to answer the question, how can one source change history? Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.